Okay.
This is a project that we worked on with Intro to Composition. And anyway, predominantly it's an elective class, mostly 11th graders, and they had, they read Robert Cormier, The Chocolate War. And as part of that, as a bit of a culminating project with regard to that novel, we ended up playing a game called What's My Passion? The Process, all right? And when we started this, the first thing that we did was the students were given, probably teams of 2 students were given a folder. And within the folder, they had the pieces of the project, you know, as they had either up to that point or what was coming down the road next. And in there, in addition to copies of the pieces of the project, we also had tags that defined what it was. Those tags dealt with like reading the story, getting the assignment, rereading the assignment, rereading the pertinent chapters. Okay, any pieces that were part of the process of doing this larger project. The first thing that students had to do was they had to align these pieces with what it actually looked like in reality. It was very interesting to see that there was some dialogue or discussion going on and on about why you had to do one thing before another thing. So the students were actually actively participating with thinking about how this process is put together. So that was the first thing. And once we made a general decision as a class about the process steps, we pasted them all up here. That was basically the first day. To give you a little bit of background about the project itself, what they had to do was they took the pertinent characters from the story, and they either had to do a parody where they assigned another, let's say a comic book character or some sort of a comic character to fill that role, or they could also use a tool called GoAnimate to create a scene from the story, all right? The sections of the story were dictated. It was suggested that it be a particular fight scene at the end of the story that they would have to parody. So, you know, part of that was defined for them. And as part of the process, Mrs. Rasmussen and I got together and we sat down and we created the parody pieces ourselves. And thus you can see here on the board. The next day when the students came in, after we had this at least top part started, before they could get a laptop out of the cart, what they had to do was teams of students, they could work as individual or in teams, had to come up here and talk with me a little bit about the process and where they were, and actually make check marks along here saying, yep, we got this done, we did this part, oh, we didn't quite finish that kind of thing. So it helped both of us to understand where they were in the process and gave them direction for where they needed to go. The next thing that we did down the road was, you know, a couple days where they actually did this work, you know, these pieces of the process that they knew were in sequential order. And one of the nice things then too, we hit a point where we talked about like you are here, meaning the students, you are here, and then the deadline for when the project was due. The nice thing about that was it helped them visualize the pieces of the process again, all the parts, because the bottom line is you can't get from that end of the process to this end of the process and do a good job on your project unless you go through the steps. And that was part of the goal of this. We had directions, so for every day that we worked together, we came up with direction for the next day so that again, when students walked in the next day, they knew where they were and they knew where they were going. And that was really important. We had a checkpoint day, so, you know, where students had to provide feedback on, you know, what was going well, if anything was frustrating, if they needed help with anything, if they needed anything in order, again, to complete this project, complete this process. And the responses, again, were very positive. If they did have something frustrated or if they needed something, it gave us enough time to address that prior to getting, again, to the deadline, to the bullseye. I have to say that overall, the end products were, I think, well done. Different, you know, degrees, different interpretations based on how the students perceived the project and, you know, what they finally finished with it. There is going to be one parody that will post, you know, with this video as well, just to give you an idea, a student sample of what they did. And I think that might be it. What I really wanted to document is how important the process is, and that sometimes we take for granted that students realize all the steps that are involved in the process, and then also help to visualize direction for them, and help to visualize maybe aspects where they might need a little bit more help or something. And I think as an educator, both Mrs. Rasmus and I were able to address things as we went along, rather than, you know, just assuming that they were comfortable with all the steps in the process.